That's great. Minister, thank you very much for coming in and taking this motion. And I suppose before I begin, I want to say that in the 3.5, coming up on 4 years that we have worked in, that I've worked in the Seanad, and you've been Minister, I have found you nothing but compassionate and dedicated to making changes that need to happen here. And I think that probably a lot of what I'm going to say you're probably going to agree with and have already actioned. And I want to, I suppose, pay tribute on what we tried to do in setting out and noting and acknowledging was all that has been accomplished and all that has been achieved. And I know in recent times you briefed me particularly on the changes that are to come and will hopefully be in the HSE service plan. But I suppose I stand here today as a voice for family carers and for those that they care for. And first we begin with those that they care for, which in the main can be children, adult children, who find themselves without services, without proper provision of even what they have already been granted in writing. And in the instance of Gail, who I heard from recently in the context of the Andrea Gilligan lunchtime show, and I know that you've commented on this, you know, that they had the experience of moving from CHO9 into CHO7, and to experience in that context that the day-to-day care plan that they had in CHO9 didn't hand over, didn't move with her son Luca, her adult son Luca. And that the response when a radio show, when that woman goes on and describes just how awful her daily life is, and the lack of a positive life for her son, who, when he had full daycare services, when he had support, actually was a life that met his best life needs. But once you took that away, he did nothing but regress, and becomes very difficult to live with. And instead of a mother and son loving each other, it becomes a daily endurance for both of them, a daily torture. The woman spoke about waking up, and when eventually he was asleep at 2:30 in the morning, that at that point she considered maybe she'd just go out for a walk, because that was the only time when she could leave the house. She missed her own mother's funeral because she had no care, despite the fact that the HSE were on notice of the fact that the woman's mother was dying. So she couldn't get to visit her, couldn't get to her funeral. Her elderly father now, she can't visit because she can't get away from her home. And she gets respite, an overnight respite, once a fortnight. And by the time that happens, she's exhausted. She needs to mind herself. And I would love to stand here and say she's a unique and isolated case. She is you know, she's the one that slipped through the cracks. But she isn't. You know, she isn't. This week I know of and will attend the funeral of a child who was cared for by her mother. I made loads of representations over the years that I've been here on their behalf and on behalf of that family. And what the HSE put in was a totally inadequate provision, totally below what she actually needed, caring for a profoundly disabled child at home. And when the nurse came, in the hours that the nurse came, the mother couldn't slip down to the shop. She couldn't, whatever, because she couldn't be left alone. But it was all right for the mother to be left alone 24 hours a day and 7 days a week when the provision wasn't there, or there was somebody sick that was being sent by the agency operating on behalf of the HSE. And you know, I can go on and on and on. When in the same programme last September, Ger, who I know as Geraldine Harris as a childhood friend, found herself telling the nation that they were so desperate after 10 years pleading with the HSE to support them with their 2 children, their 2 sons who were profoundly disabled, or had profound disabilities, that the elder son, they had to, when he went into respite, they rang up the respite to say they weren't taking him home because they reached that level of absolute desperation. We see the child law report, and the child that is left in a room with no natural light, with no Wi-Fi, no TV, off an emergency department for 60 days while the HSE and TUSLA fight with each other about who's responsible. And the HSE have the gall to walk into the High Court and say, when eventually the parents and the family of that girl take the case, to say it didn't do her any harm. I would defy any of us to be in a room with no outlet, not being able to leave it for 60 days with no natural light and not be done any harm, let alone somebody who is in there because they were already encountering and trying to cope with, or clearly not particularly coping with, mental health issues and a plethora of other things. So somewhere in the system, on the ground, I've met the people on the ground. I know their passion, their heart. I know how much they go way beyond the call of duty in many occasions, and the things that they do, and how much they are under pressure to be supported in their job, how burnt out they get, how tired they get, how understaffed we are in some of our community disability teams. So I know there are people that are fantastic, that are really, really fantastic professionals. But somewhere in the middle, somewhere in all of this, is an attitude of, I don't know, I find it, I really struggle to put words on it. I know the words that I put on it in private, but out in public, the words are an abject lack of empathy, an abject lack of foreseeability. You know, things that I'm not a professional in any of these areas, but I can foresee that we need a panel of people to provide relief because, God forbid, that a woman needs to go and get a breast scan or go to breast check or do any of the things that should be, even go get their nails done or their hair done because it's therapeutic and it's a good thing to do for your own self-esteem. That none of that can be planned for because you don't know that you'll have support, and that you can face into a parent's funeral and nobody to say, it's okay, it's okay, we'll cover this, we'll have somebody to cover this. And nobody in management to turn around and say, we should have a panel for this. You know, I was a manager in services that had childcare. We always had a panel of relief staff because you had to meet your ratios, you had to do all of those. So sorry, Micheál, I'm talking into your time. So really sorry. You never gave me binding. Oh, is that the 12? All right, sorry, thank you very much. So in this, you know, the things that I call for are the assurance of, that it's a priority. I have had people on the telephone say to me, well, you know, that family are highly litigious and we just need to watch that. And my response to that is, isn't it awful that they had to consider taking legal action because of the failure to provide them with services? You know, Micheál will deal with the children that don't have services, but this family carers who yearn for their child to have a full, meaningful life and live their best life, and for they themselves to have some comfort, that they are not being served. They may be served in parts of the country, and I acknowledge there are parts of the country that are very good, but we have a postcode lottery going on that, depending on where you live or what CHO you have the misfortune to find yourself in, you are not getting served. And in fact, there is in some elements, there is an attitude of contempt for the fact that you need these services. Not from government, because I know the wrestling for money, I know the services, the provision, that there's more money now than there's ever been. It's not for the want of services, but the facts of the matter on the ground are that people don't feel that they can plan for their emergency, they can't plan for their future, they worry about their child, and I'm sure Senator Clone will say that, but there are things that should be foreseeable, that should be appreciated, that should be supported. There are things, and we've listed them in the calls that we have put for government to consider. You know, and so I urge us to take urgent action, to look at what more can be done. What more? It's not okay to say for someone from the HSE to come in to the Children's Committee and say it'll take us about 6 or 7 years to fix the HR disaster that it is and the recruitment disaster that is going on. That's not okay. There are people passing by developmental stages, crucial moments in their life that are just bypassing them. So that is not okay. So I would urge us, we really need to act with a level of urgency so that people know the true care that goes on behind closed doors, because I know huge care goes on behind closed doors. We're in arguing, in looking for services, in making sure that there are provisions, that there's budget, that there's all of that. But there are people in our state being failed, and it is not okay, and it needs to end. A solution, a number of solutions, and we have suggested them in the things that we have called for. We are saying these things need to be addressed as a matter of urgency. And in that we demonstrate we appreciate the families, we value the person with the disability, we value their life, we value their family support, and we are here to envelop that with care, as we should, as a just society, as we should. I will address the amendments in my rebuttal, or my piece at the end, and I will deal with them then. Thank you, Minister.
Seery-Kaerney for moving the motion.